Hey, what's happening out there, guys? Thank you as always for stopping by the channel. This is my first episode of 80s Rewind, a series devoted to my favorite decade in cinema. And to kick things off, we're stepping back to 1989 to talk about the comic book blockbuster Batman, directed by Tim Burton. I think this movie is an all-time classic, and I certainly think it reinvigorated what at the time was a dying genre. Batman would be passed through many studios. It would end up having tonal changes and script changes before settling in at Warner Brothers, where it would pull in more than $250 million to become the highest-grossing U.S. film in 1989. In the late 80s, the Superman franchise had officially stalled out with the quest for peace in 87, and Batman was just what audiences needed to get excited about comic book movies again. Gone was the spandex, the slapstick humor, and the campiness. Well, most of it. And in was a leather-cladded hero in an intimidating suit that lingered in the shadows and the darkness to take down the criminals who dared to bring harm to the people of Gotham. And this was just a gritty take on the Caped Crusader that captured plenty of emotional turmoil and the intrigue of characters at odds with themselves. On top of that, it was littered with fun splashes of violent action and adventure and morbid context that just all fit perfectly into Burton's fantastical atmosphere, and this movie would just take the world by storm. Throughout 89 and into 1990, Batman was everywhere, and as a 12 and 13-year-old, I couldn't get enough of it. I even read the novelization a couple times and still have my copy to this day. And I really do think the movie is a complete package. It has a fun, fantastic cast. The visual appeal of the production design is like a character of its own as Gotham's skyline just kind of looms over its citizens. The scoring from Danny Elfman was perfectly crafted, and the soundtrack from Prince injects the film with a sassiness and an attitude that was bold and vibrant, and injected the film with tons of charisma. I remember watching this movie like 3 or 4 times during its initial theatrical run, then I don't even know how many times, at least 10 times or more at the second run theater in my neighborhood. Then I remember getting the VHS copy for my birthday in December, and from there I can't even count how many times I rewatched this movie growing up. I think the movie effectively begins its mental escape just into the world of Batman from the opening seconds through Elfman's triumphant scoring, and in minutes as the viewer you're immersed into the dark and seedy world of Gotham. The visuals are cold and dark, the Art Deco design invokes thought and tells a story that's very fascinating about this city that the Caped Crusader calls home. The blend of various architectural stylings to Gotham really is a beautiful mess that you just can't look away from, but it's just really a great setting for creating a classical noir vibe with just plenty of contemporary elements. It really is impossible to kind of pinpoint a time period for this film, and I think these creative settings and tonal stylings are just awesome for escaping into as the viewer. And what Batman 89 really does pull off is serving as that middle ground between the Adam West era of the Batman from the 60s and the Nolan-inspired Dark Knight era that would come after this one. It weaves Batman and Bruce Wayne's origins with a smooth flow. It also structures the foundations to the Joker as well, and while it's all a bit surface level and built on common story tropes, it's without question an appealing adventure. One that was certainly carried by its 2 leads, because Keaton and Nicholson were fantastic. I think they were perfectly cast. Nicholson, being an A-lister at the time, was just cool to see him completely investing in and committing to this material. He's having fun in his character, and all his eccentric animations and physical antics blend in to create a fantastic representation of the Joker, one that's just as evil as he is playful. A demented man with no limits to the violence and pain he can cause, but at the same time a man that has a sense of humor and a charm worthy of being the Joker. And I mean, Nicholson brought all of that to this character. Now, as for Michael Keaton, while he wasn't necessarily the logical choice for the role at the time, I definitely think he stepped in and made the character his own, both in the costume and, most importantly, out of the costume as Bruce Wayne. Keaton really steps back and forth on each side of this role, and he captured the duality of Bruce Wayne and Batman with ease. He commands the screen with the confidence of wealth. There's also moments you can see the switch in his personality to capture that darker side of the role, and with his mannerisms and just his simple expressions and gestures, Keaton conveys it all and still manages to invoke that slight everyman charm to the character extremely well. And I also think Keaton was able to land some endearing moments of vulnerability in his scenes with Alfred and Vale, and then in the very next scene he can deliver just the imposing presence and intimidation of Batman. So for delivering the complete package for this famous role, I gotta say Michael Keaton hit a home run. However, this was much more than the Keaton and Nicholson show, because the supporting cast, in my opinion, was fantastic as well. Pat Hingle very much felt like a comic book version of Commissioner Gordon. Robert Wool brought a dated charm to the role of Knox, and Billy D. Williams brought style to the role of Harvey Dent in his few scenes, and Michael Gough was fantastic as Alfred. And as for Kim Basinger, the leading lady, I thought she was awesome as well. She was stunning, and despite the film constantly forcing her into the damsel in distress department, there were some sincere moments where she captured an intelligence to the role that made her feel like a smart fit for Wayne's love interest, and that was something that I thought translated nicely on screen through that raw chemistry between Basinger and Keaton. Now, as for the story, the plotline overall is simplistic, but it works. It frames up the showdown between the Batman and the Joker nicely to keep the engagement up. It's an easy film you can just sit back and find yourself consumed by, and with an emphasis on the practical effects, I think the blend of action that this movie delivers holds up extremely well all these years later. So to close up this episode, I'll give Batman 89-90%. It's a little too childish at times, and the story could have been a little bit more complex, but again, this was the 80s and comic book movies were much different back then, but I do think this is just a complete superhero flick that doesn't just deliver an origin story, it captures the vibe and the nuances of the source material very effectively, but it works it in new directions that show a ton of creative ambition and wonder for not just telling the story of these characters, but creating a world for the story to be set in.